You know, one of the big reasons that we play other TTRPGs is so that we can check out their mechanics and bring that stuff over into the games that we love. So we tried a new one this week and we fell in love with it and came up with a whole bunch of ideas for how these new game mechanics could benefit us in other ways. And will we play this game forever? We're going to keep playing it here and there. But there's a lot to learn in how this game's simplicity streamlines narrative. Check this out. Hey everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance, your weekly Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPG podcast, where every week Rich, Garrett, and I pick up a subject around the culture of gaming and discuss it with you. So without further ado, sharpen up those daggers. We're going to get started right now.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the iCast Guidance podcast. This is your boy, Richard Froen, and with me here are my astute helpers, Garrett and Todd. How are we doing, guys?
Oh, I'm doing great.
I'm not necessarily sure I'm astute, but
yeah, no, I don't know about that.
Here are my forgetful helpers. Todd did a fun thing this morning. We started the podcast, right? And we talked for about 5 or 8 minutes. And then Todd realized that he forgot to hit record. Todd, how do you feel about this?
What is this, a session on the couch? I want to put you over in this seat for 5 minutes with all this equipment. And I want to say, all right, Rich, let's have you at, let's see you do it. Come on.
That's a death sentence. I wouldn't last. I'd have a conniption.
There's a lot of buttons, a lot of switches over there. I give them props, but we've had this problem before.
We have. And thankfully, I didn't get 35 minutes into the podcast before I figured it out.
I appreciate that.
It's happened.
Anyway, our listeners don't want to hear this squabble.
You're kind of like Oracle. You're like the one in the chair. You got so many monitors and stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, all my surveillance cameras.
Yeah.
So we got some good stuff going on. It's Halloween.
Spooky time.
We've been playing some good games.
Yeah, we did.
Mm-hmm.
We did a little bit of 10 Candles this week.
I know. And I'm almost finished with that edit. That thing is going to drop. I think I'm going to drop that on Tuesday. So that would be the day after you're listening to this podcast. That episode should drop. It's a big one. It's a beast.
You got to check it out. It's probably one of our like nicely packaged products, super high quality, super different than anything we've ever done on the channel.
But that's what we're here to talk about today, too, because on the podcast today, we're talking about the experience of playing this new game, which we had never played before. So number one, I want to get into a whole thing on the learning curve of this thing, which was minimal. We got a lot to chat about, which is cool. Mm-hmm. But first, I would love to have a little moment where we talk about one of our listener comments because I thought it was super valuable.
Yeah.
All right. So on the YouTube channel, we had a comment from Deputy Teddy. Now, this is a comment that is genuinely good, constructive criticism. And I so appreciate hearing this. And we are actually going to enact it. So let me read this. It says, I love the content of this episode very much. It's very insightful and it helps me a lot for my second homebrew campaign world building. As I am a notorious multitasker and listen to podcasts during all kinds of activities, driving, cleaning, gaming, I find myself rewinding a whole friggin' lot because with the background music, I can't focus on the spoken word. It would make me so happy if you could tone it down a whole bunch or remove the music altogether.
Genius.
That's gold.
Yeah.
Right. And I got to say that, that comment came right on the heels of me kind of listening to what I posted and I'm listening to that background music and I'm kind of like, I feel like that might be too much.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a little overbearing. I was trying to show new people the podcast and after a couple of minutes, I realized I'm like, damn, this is a party in here. We got to tone it down a little bit.
Yeah. There's been times where I've been listening on headphones. I'm like, it's a little overtaking. Mm-hmm. So I think we all felt the same way.
I did. And, I'm not going to say this comment is also not confirmation bias. What I mean by that is just because I happen to be thinking about that thing when it came in, that makes me feel good about the comment. No, I would have taken that to heart, even if I thought the music was the best thing in the world, because I do like receiving criticism that is worded in a way that is, constructive. In the past, we've had people come on and they're like, hey, the audio is shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, okay, great. Thanks for starting off that way. How much attention do you think you're going to get from the person you're trying to address when you start off by smacking them in the face?
Yeah, it's all about delivery.
right?
Yeah.
So I think critique is great. And this is really well handled. So Deputy Teddy, thank you for that. And I hope you notice that while you're listening to this podcast right now, there's no music bed.
Ooh. And
or a much softer music bed.
Well,
I haven't decided yet.
I haven't decided yet. I think given the intensity of the music bed we were using, that even if I softened that, that's not a good choice.
Okay.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about with this is one of the podcasts I listen to on a regular basis. It's called the Blind Boy Podcast. It's this Irish dude out of, he's out of Ireland. I went and checked. I'm like, does he have a music bed? And he does. But it's so subtle that you don't know it's there. And I think that's what you got to do.
What if we did a little like pocket bard? Is that a thing?
We could put some pocket bard in there and really just drop it down to almost imperceptible.
Yeah. That'd be very cool. A little fire like crackling in it and stuff. That'd be nice.
All right. So you guys that are out there listening to this particular episode and the ones going forward, let us know what you think. Jump on YouTube. And is it better with no music bed? Is it better with something really subtle? Let us know.
Let us know.
All right. So we're going to talk about 10 Candles today. And this game that we learned and played really in the spirit of Halloween and to kind of give us something new to talk about and a lot of how it works.
Phenomenal experience. As someone who values the role play and storytelling above all else when playing TTRPGs, this was one of my favorite experiences we've had at the table so far.
Yeah, I thought it was a great experience when you first presented it to the group. I was a little hesitant. I didn't understand it maybe quite, but once you start playing it, I totally got, the vibe and how it played through. And it was really interesting. The whole no prep coming to the table with like nothing. And we made something, I think, fantastic out of it.
I think this is where we should start the conversation because it says right in the PDF, the overview, the rule set, it's about no preparation almost whatsoever. Now, the GM does have to sort of understand a little bit about and I'm putting air quotes around this, the module that you'd be using. But really what that module is just a setting and a basic description. That's it. You do not have to have months invested in reading, a 400-page book to totally understand what's going on here.
Well, I think they do it for a purpose, right? I think they do it so you come in to the game and come into the table in a malleable place.
Mm-hmm.
And in being in that kind of place makes you open to improv and going with the flow. And that's what this game is all about, this creative storytelling. It's the most collaborative form of storytelling we've ever done.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing I think that it does super well is it turns over the agency of the storytelling to the players, and it takes a lot of it out of the GM's hands. So I kind of was letting you guys run with this, and I loved watching it unfold.
I think another thing that we should probably briefly describe is this is solely designed as a one shot. I mean, I guess there could be, but there is no surviving this game. Essentially.
Yeah. So this is one of the premises of the game is no one survives, right? And the game is done in 2 to 3 hours. Now, the episode that we're going to drop of us playing this game is about 3 hours and 18 minutes long. So that's a long thing to watch, right? But if you think about it in terms of gameplay with you and your friends, especially, a lot of our 3 hours was based around figuring a few things out.
Mm-hmm.
And once you play the game the second time, you're going to be in that 2 to 3 hour window very easily. So,
and with that, I believe in those 3 hours compared to like our regular D&D uploads, you have a beginning, middle, and end, and phenomenal pacing with 10 different scenes, and they're getting quicker as you go on, and the danger is rising as you go on. It's going to be an experience to go through.
Absolutely. And, one of the other things we're going to do is we're going to be dropping a YouTube video on the basics of how to play this game. And we're going to try and keep that one contained into like 20 or so minutes. But if what we're talking about today interests you, and I think it really should, if you're a TTRPG player, this game should pique your interest a little bit. Because number one, the setting can be anywhere you want it to be. Are you into medieval fantasy? Fine. Set your world in a medieval setting. Are you into, tragic horror, space opera? Fine. Set it in outer space. You can totally do that as well. Gothic? Perfect. Current day? Perfect. They all work. So definitely something you should think about looking at, and check out the video we're going to drop on how to play this.
And even like inspiration wise, like it'd be really interesting to take the whole, like, what you're rolling for is narrative control of that moment. Taking that into just like a long form, like medieval game, if you wanted to, you could totally do it. You could just, like, without the candles or anything, you could just like go through a story if you guys want to with your characters, and
Yes.
it's interesting.
Yeah. So on the note of rolling, let's just talk about the dice mechanic in this game and how balance works. Because I think this is one of the things that makes the game really, truly simplistic and fun. So you basically start off where the players of the game have 10 six-sided dice. Okay. Those 10 six-sided dice are rolled to determine if in any kind of situation where an outcome has consequences, they roll the dice. We call this a conflict roll, right? So it can be like, I want to open this door. Fine, make a conflict roll to see what you see on the other side. Or I want to try and kill this thing. Fine, make a conflict roll. There are no tables, charts, or anything to work off of. It's just like, does this work or does this not work? End of story, right? You roll those 10 dice, and if you get a single 6 in all of that, you have succeeded, right? What about the ones? What happens with the ones?
When you roll ones, those dice that were 1 are now removed from the dice pool for that scene. And if you don't get any 6s, you fail. But, this creates a sort of snowball effect, where as the scene goes on longer, the chances of failure go up. And as you go through different scenes and lose the amount of dice you have as a whole, the chances for failure keep rising.
Yeah, what Rich was just saying, how the scenes go along. As the scene progresses, if you do fail, a candle gets blown out. And then that's one less dice in the player's dice pool, because that die, then it goes over to the GM.
Yeah, so that's something we should clarify, because the game is divided into scenes. So the game is called 10 Candles, and this is great. You physically light 10 tea light candles during your character creation phase, which is part of the game. You don't come to the table with a character, right? But you light 10 tea light candles. So as you are playing the first scene, 10 candles are lit. But then in every scene change, a candle gets blown out. Now that candle getting blown out is a signifier of several things. One, time. When we're out of candles, we're out of time. We die. 2, when we're down a candle, one of those dice that the players were using goes over to the GM side. So at first, all 10 dice are on the side of the players. But if 5 candles are blown out because we're on the 5th or 6th scene, then now 5 dice have transferred over to the power of the GM. So all of a sudden, the balance of power begins to shift, which is kind of cool.
Todd's talking about balance of power. Because when you do make a conflict roll on the player side to determine the outcome of a scene or whatever you want to do, open that door, try to attack this baddie or whatever, the GM would in turn roll, if they have a dice pool, to determine if they get 6s. Because everything's based off of the 6s or the 1s in this game for the most part. And if they beat the number of 6s on the player side, if the GM beats the 6s, they get control of the narrative. The player still succeeds in what they want to do, but the narrative is then pushed to the GM side. So what we really liked was the storytelling element and the driving of the narrative in this game from the side of the players.
Yeah, and it really creates a sense of, like, I don't know, like stress and anxiety when, like, you're rolling and you know that, like, this scene is in dire straits right now. If we don't succeed on this, we're kind of doomed.
Mm-hmm.
If we go on to the next scene and lose another dice, it's only going to keep getting worse. And, like, there were some times when I was rolling, or like people around the table were rolling, and I'm on the edge of my seat, just like, oh my God, are we cooked right now? Are we done? What's going on? It's crazy.
Yeah. So I think to kind of just sum up and trying to, like, bring this all back together, the dice basically function as 2 things. 1, they determine if something succeeds or fails. And 2, they determine who has control of the narrative. And this is really crucial to how the game is played, because when the players have control of the narrative, they can kind of do what they want. So imagine for a minute, I want to kill this guy. Okay, well, in any normal TTRPG, we would have a set of attack rolls with damage. We would have tables to determine, well, how hard is it to hit this thing and how many hit points do they have? Are we taking those down? Like there's so many different determining factors to sort of slow things down. In this game, it's like, I want to attack this guy. And I'm like, make a conflict roll. If you roll 1 6 in that dice pool, I'm like, you got it. What happens? And now it's on you, the player, to determine how that goes down. You might have injured him. You might have killed him. You yourself might decide to get injured in how that narrative plays out. At the end of the day, you know you're going to die, and it's about telling a story. And it's just about, well, who's telling the story now? Me, the GM, or you, the player? The dice determine that. That streamlines this game beautifully.
And it's fun too. Like losing, like a not succeeding is just as fun as succeeding because you're in control. You can fully narrate it and you're just trying to tell a good story. So you're not trying to win anything. It's I don't know. It's sometimes even more interesting to like mess up and have something bad happen.
Yeah, I think what Rich was kind of saying is just telling a story, coming to this table knowing that we're not the big hero adventurer here like D&D, and there's no winning per se. Knowing that, you know, you got to give you everything you've got, essentially. We're just telling a fantastic story here.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
I mean,
and to roundabout on the dice, like I kind of use the dice in a specific way. Like the amount of 6s I got really colored my telling of what happens. So like the more 6s I got, the more fantastic my success was. And the more failures I got or the more 1s I got, you know, the more fantastic my failure was.
Well, to be clear, that's not a rule in the game, but that's how you decided to take the gradient of how well or poorly you did.
I like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah, I love that as a decision you made on your own. Another thing we did in that was, and I want to go into more detail on this later, but there was a moment where you couldn't decide what you were going to do. You started to do a thing, and then you backed away from doing that thing.
Yeah.
And then you said, can I change gears here? And I said, well, okay, but I'm going to take that moment to inject something else into the story because of your hesitation.
Yeah. Because they wouldn't stop moving if I stopped to hesitate.
Correct.
You know?
Correct. So we kept a level of urgency about the game too, which was kind of cool. So why don't we talk a little bit about how character creation plays a role as part of the gameplay in this? Because I found this also to be really interesting. You do not have to know who you're going to play when you sit down at the table with your friends.
And you don't even have full control of your character, which is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So
I didn't know how I felt about that at first, but you know, it played into it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it colors in the character a little bit more than you maybe had planned in the moment, you know?
So basically a character consists of just a few minimal skeletal things, right? You have a name. You have a concept for your character and a description. So it's sort of like, you know, my name is Phil. So that's my name. And then in my concept, it's like, you know, I'm a retired plumber. I used to be the local handyman, but I specialized in pipe work. And then you have a description of the character, right? And you're like, you know, I typically wear jeans, a t-shirt. Occasionally I've got like a, you know, Carhartt canvas jacket, baseball cap. I drive a beat up Volkswagen truck, right? Mm-hmm. So that's basically where you begin. And then there are five things that go with that. We've got a virtue, something we're proud of. We've got a vice, something we're not proud of. We have a moment, which I'll describe in a second. We have a brink, and we have a final recording, a recording of our final words.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and all of those really, I don't know, like paint a nice overall picture of who you're playing, and it gives you just enough to role play.
Agreed.
You know,
agreed. But you said we weren't in control of some of that stuff, so let's talk about how that works.
So it's fun. It was certain with the vice, you write that down, and then you pass it to the person on your left, and that becomes their vice. And with the virtue, you write that down, you pass it to the person on your right, and that becomes their virtue. So you're given these puzzle pieces of your character that aren't of your creation.
Yeah. So the player next to you is creating your vices and virtues.
Right.
So it's like you don't even know until you get that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's an index card you fill out an index card and you don't even know until you get that what your character is really going to be. The only thing that you really have control in is what's called the moment.
Yeah.
For your character.
And the moment is basically a sentence that you complete, and it says, I will find hope in ... or I will find hope when ... And you are trying to sort of, in the face of darkness, in the face of this sort of apocalyptic situation, this is where you would find hope. So you might say, I will find hope when I finally find my wife who went missing when all this began. Or I will find hope when I see a little bit of light when I never thought I'd see it again. And then that gets written down on its own index card. So you have an index card for the vice, an index card for the virtue, an index card for the moment. And then there's the brink.
You have, well, can I talk about moment for a second?
Yeah, let's talk about moment.
So you think about your moment as kind of your completion of your character arc. So, in good storytelling, your characters start in a certain place and they end in a completely different place. Now, over the course of this game and this couple hours, there's going to be a moment where your character, completes the task that they are seeking to complete, and in turn changing who they are. But it's also fun because you cannot complete your moment, and that too is a character arc that that failure sticks with people and will change them.
Yeah, I love how you put that. I was going to put it as like a goal for your character, and then how you made a comment that you might not get to it. I didn't get to mine. And it was just like, I couldn't complete it. Couldn't do it.
And the other thing is we'll talk about this in a minute, and you guys can certainly go see the videos on how to play these things. But each of these index cards with a vice, a virtue, a moment, and a brink, they get played throughout the game for different types of either rewards or rollovers or whatever. And the moment, if you achieve your moment, if you find that moment, you gain hope and you gain an extra die in your dice pool. And that actually has a slightly better roll probability in it. So you almost become stronger by completing that story arc, right? Mm-hmm. You become more of a well-rounded character that's capable.
I can count multiple times where the only reason I succeeded was because my hope die rolled a 5, and it can succeed on a 5 and a 6 instead of just the normal 6.
Right.
So that was the only reason sometimes when I succeeded. And I was like, guys, can you please get your hope dice?
Yeah, I remember watching your rolls, because we're sitting like 3-sided table here, and I was able to look at both people's rolls, and you got your hope or your moment and your hope die early, and you were able to use it quite a few times, and it definitely helped you.
Game changer.
I think that's why I was so distraught in not getting to mine. I was just like,
Yeah.
Now, an important thing to point out here is that you do not light all the 10 candles at the same time. So during character creation, while we're writing vices, we're writing virtues, we're writing moments, there are instructions for when to light certain numbers of candles. So when you first set out to create your character name, your description, and your concept, we're lighting 3 candles, right? Then we're going through vices and virtues and moments, and we're lighting 3 more candles. And then what else we got? So we've got the brink.
I want to talk about the brink.
I do too. I love the brink.
The brink is probably my favorite out of the 4. So the brink is also one of the traits that you are not in control of.
Nope.
The brink is given to you by the person to your right. And the way this changes your character, the brink is written out on the sheet as, I saw you blank.
Or I have seen you.
I have seen you blank.
Yeah.
And it also creates like a pre-established history with the person on your left, because you've seen them do this thing when they're pushed to their absolute worst place. And yeah.
So it's basically what happens when they are pushed to the brink, when they are pushed over the edge. And the really cool thing about this to me is everything we've described so far, vices, virtues, and moments, are only exchanged amongst the players. But when it comes to writing the brink, the GM is involved, because the GM plays the part of, putting air quotes around this, them. Them is a general term for who the bad guys are. And the GM gets to decide what they look like. They can be alien creatures. They can be zombies. They can be, you know, well, you get the point. You get to make that up, right? And so when the GM gets to participate in the brink, that means that they, whoever they are, has seen one of the players do something, either in an act of desperation or when they've been pushed to the edge, and they get to pass that to a player. Likewise, one of the players has seen them do something as well. So a player gets to empower them with their own brink. Now, the only thing that's not allowed is you cannot weaken them by writing a brink that would otherwise make them less powerful.
I will say I was the person who was able to write the brink for them. And it was the most fun I had setting up the game.
It also changed the entire story.
It did.
I kind of want to say it, but I don't want to spoil the narrative.
Yeah, we have it was fantastic though. You did a really good job writing that.
Thank you.
And I think in the game, Todd, you wrote the brink for Eric's player, and it worked absolutely perfect. I can't remember at this second what it was, but I remember when it came up and it was like you wrote that, and it played in absolutely perfect to the scene when it was used.
I also don't want to create any spoilers for the show, but I wrote that brink. And when Eric was involved, first of all, he had already burned his vice. He had, and we'll talk about the burning, but he had used his vice, used his virtue, had his moment, and then the brink was up. Because remember, everybody, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but each of these index cards gets organized into a pile in front of you. The one on top of the pile is active, and you get to use it if it's active. The brink must always be on the bottom because it's sort of like the last thing. You can't use that brink until further on into the game. And Eric, we were down to like scene 9.
Yeah. It was at the end.
And Eric's came up perfectly. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how seamlessly that fit into the story.
It was good. It was so good.
And we can keep talking about seamlessness because every core structure of this game works in tandem with each other. Like even the fact that we are working with live candles, because while we were playing in one of the most stressful moments possible, when the dice roll mattered the most, one of the candles went out on its own,
which denotes a scene change, and you stop, right? And that was like end of scene.
It was basically what would have happened if we failed that dice roll.
Right.
It just automatically happened.
Right, exactly. So one of the things you guys have to remember out there is in 10 candles, when imagine dividing a movie into 10 scenes. Each of those scenes can be set up however you want. So in the middle of a scene, if there's a failure and a candle has to be blown out, that scene comes to an end and the players determine where the next scene goes. Let's say a candle goes out on its own. Well, now you're moving on to the next scene no matter what. So if the candles are all really burned down because you spent too much time hemming and hawing or deciding what to do or taking too much time developing your characters, you are really pushing yourself to the edge and candles can start going out. And they did.
Yeah, they did. And it was creating a suspense at the table because we're looking at the candles and we're like, oh, that one's getting really low. Like we need to make a decision here. Like, cause
I mean, at the end of the scene, when we were deciding what candle to put out, we were being strategic. Which one looks the lowest? Let's blow that one out. And I remember in specific moments when some people were taking too long to do things. I'm like, yo, we gotta go. The candle's burning down. Let's go.
It's a suspense mechanism. It helped.
Yeah,
I agree.
Totally helped. All right, listen, why don't we take a quick break? And we're going to say a few words to you on the break. And then when we come back, we've got a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the really awesome ways in which the general tenets of the game were respected. We want to talk about that. So we'll see you in a few minutes. Hey, esteemed listeners. Listen, if you like what we're up to today and you like the content that we produce here at Wither and Bloom Studios and what we talk about on iCast Guidance, today's request is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes I'm trying to get you to subscribe. Sometimes I'm trying to get you to go over to Patreon and support us. Today, I think I'm going to just ask you to share the word. Tell people that we're out there. Tell people that this podcast exists. Tell people that Wither and Bloom Studios are putting together a good thing. I see comments on our channel all the time that we're underrated, and we really want to grow. We want to talk to more people. We love getting into a bigger community, and I feel like you all can help us do that. So do me a favor this week. Tell a friend we're out there. See if you can get someone to listen. It'd be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, we're back from the break, and we got to get into one of the last aspects of character creation, which is the voice recording, which is totally unique to this kind of game. I thought this was one of the best parts.
It was really interesting. We all stepped out of the room. We went outside, and you record a personal message or personal recording of, someone's going to find this tape after you've died. What do you want to say? What are your last words? It was really personal. It was interesting. And then in the end, hearing everyone's recordings, because we played them after, the final scene ends.
Yeah. After you're sitting in darkness, all the candles have gone out. The only thing to do is listen to your character's last words. But the beautiful thing for me was the fact that the recordings serve as a way to look at your character's arc and how they've changed throughout, because your character can be recording this in the beginning of before we start playing. That's when it takes place. Like before the game starts, they've recorded this, right? And it shows what your character wanted, who they were, and the morals that they held.
Mm-hmm.
And after everything has happened and you see whether they, rose to the occasion or became the worst parts of themselves, you get to see what they were before. And just seeing that, right in front of your eyes, one after another, is beautiful.
Yeah. And, I want to say this is in the rules of the game. It talks about how the GM will pass their phone around and have each player record into the phone their final words. We decided to sort of tweak that rule a little bit. And I had each of you go outside on your own because I didn't want everyone else to know what your final words were. I wanted to keep that much more sort of as a reveal for the end, which I found to be really tremendously successful. I would recommend that for anyone playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. It's thematic.
So, yeah. So you had said it best, Rich, when we played. You said, what a great punctuation mark on the end of what we just did. Those words are perfect.
Yeah. And that's what it is, whether it's a question mark, an exclamation mark, or just a period, Yeah,
like a big period, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, yeah, for sure. And so then the last thing, so you record your voices and you also go through what inventory the player is carrying for everybody. So it's like, all right, you went through your description. What do you have on you? This is basically all you can carry in your pockets. That's it. You've got the minimum in this game.
And you can go and you can make yourself a superhero and you have everything known to man, or you can choose what your character would have taken with them when everything went dark and the world went to shit. What realistically would they have in their pockets?
Yeah. And I got to say, I would push back against becoming, somebody that's too overpowered, somebody that's a superhero. I feel like this is going to work much better. And we're going to talk about this a little bit before we close out today, but about this idea of let's be realistic here. Let's really play it like it would have probably gone down.
Yeah, I know. Me personally, when we were describing what our inventory was, I chose to have a small flashlight, little everyday carry type flashlight in my pocket. But I chose just that one extra thing where I said it only has 10% battery left.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
It's like it's almost done. So it's not like, I don't have 5 flashlights with backup batteries on me and everything like that. It's, it played into the narrative.
I mean, or if you want to get totally ridiculous, it's like, I'm carrying 3 guns with 9 magazines and I'm completely ripped. I've got a dagger in my sock. I've got a suitcase nuke in a backpack. It's like, okay, superstar. That's not going to make for, an intense game.
Exactly. You got to have stakes,
Yeah, stakes. Exactly. Why don't we talk a little bit about how the cards function now? Because the index cards, your vice, your virtue, your moment, and your
brink.
Your brink, thank you, are utilized in a deck-like fashion. You've got them in front of you. One is on top. And all of a sudden you come up against a situation. You make a roll as players, and you, in your roll, let's say you have a 6, so it does succeed, but you also roll 3 or 4 1s. Now you have an opportunity to utilize the top card.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're creating essentially a loadout of cards, and the one that's on top is the only one you have access to.
Right.
And as Todd stated, if you have multiple 1s, and you remember back to when we were talking about those 1s, yeah, we succeeded, but those are now going to go into like a discard pile that we don't get to use the rest of the scene. If you can figure out how to use that card that's on top, your vice or virtue, into the narrative, you can burn that card, essentially destroying it, activating it, and you get to re-roll those 1s.
To possibly not lose them.
Yeah.
Exactly. But here's the beautiful part. Garrett, when you say burn, we physically burn them. You have a fireproof bowl in the middle of the table, and you set the card on fire and you throw it in the bowl. So one of the things that they talk about in the game Daggerheart is bring the game mechanics physically to the table. So for an example, if the GM is going to utilize a timer, put the timer die right on the table and say, this is a timer. And when it counts down, all hell breaks loose, whatever. So that's a way to bring, and what they're doing here in 10 Candles is they're bringing this physicality to the game mechanic right to the table. And it's using fire. What could be better than fire, for crying out loud? I know.
Fire.
I love that. So you get to burn this. And then once you burn it, you reveal the next card in your loadout. You think about how that might go down. And that next card, that order of the loadout was chosen by you. So you might decide that after burning your virtue, you're looking to have your moment. Maybe your vice is hiding under that moment and you can't use it until you've had your moment.
I think that like putting the moment as close to the top is probably like the best thing you can. It goes by every person, right? You all have your different strategy and whatnot, but I like getting my hope dice pretty early.
Yeah, and it also depends on what your moment is. I mean, if you're searching for something, or if I don't know exactly, but my moment, I just couldn't get past it. I could not come to a scenario, or no, it wasn't my moment. Sorry, I think it was my vice, because I didn't create that vice. Another player at the table did, and no matter what the scenario was, I could not find a way to build it into the narrative and to use it. And, it just not being able to get to that moment, maybe changing the order. Like I put mine lower because it was more of like a finding someone. So I figured, later in the story, that didn't work so well for me.
It was not for lack of trying. You tried really hard to get that done, and you just couldn't.
But you know what? This is a perfect moment for us right now, because we're talking about this idea of, well, we got these cards and we got to play them into the narrative. And what if my moment was about finding someone? Well, what if the GM just doesn't even know what that moment is? And well, this is not a typical TTRPG where the GM is in control of the story. And at the beginning of every new scene, we do a process called establishing truths. Now, I noticed after our game that we played our establishing truths in a way that wasn't exactly described in the rule book. You can play it however you want, right? But what happens in this part of the game is you establish a truth for every candle that's lit on the table. And each person, including the GM, participates in that process. So if you have 3 players, and a GM for a total of 4, and there are 8 candles still lit, each of you will establish 2 truths in order going around the table. What this does is it sets the next scene. This scene can be a direct continuation of the scene before it, or the scene can be completely different. Meaning, let's say the party in scene number 2 is leaving an abandoned mall, and you've managed to steal a van, and you're leaving an abandoned mall, and you're racing down the highway in the dark. And all of a sudden, there's a failure for some kind of conflict roll, whatever the case may be. And now that denotes, let's go to the next scene. So we last saw our players when they were speeding down a highway after leaving an abandoned mall. Now we're going to establish truths. Well, everybody starts off, the GM starts off by saying, this much is true. The world is dark. And then we begin to go around the table. And you could say, like, the first person that starts us off could change the whole game and say, the party is now 2 states away after traveling for 9 hours. And they are standing at the edge of a collapsed bridge, staring into the abyss, wondering how they're going to get across this on their journey north. Right. And so that doesn't have to be a direct continuation. It can be completely a shift. We have to sort of respect the narrative and not go too, the party is now standing on Mars. Well, that's not going to work. Right. But you get the idea.
And it's very yes and. Like, as it goes around, you cannot contradict each other.
Correct.
It's truth. It's spoken. It has happened.
Correct. If a truth is established, then it is the truth. Now, the beautiful thing about this is, Garrett, you were saying, well, my moment was trying to find somebody. Now, it would not be fair play to find your moment in the establishing of truths. That's not the establishing of truths is to sort of set a scene. Finding your moment should be the result of a conflict role.
Yeah. No. We talked about that because we're all new to this game. So we were trying to figure it out. And when we were starting to do the truths, I think it was Eric was saying that same exact thing that you just said. Can I build my moment into a truth? And we were like, no, like, it should be more natural.
Right. But you could sort of preload that scene with the potential for that, in other words, let's say you're trying to find your sister. And in that truth that you establish, you say, we're in this location because I spotted my sister as she was running into the woods. Okay, great. Now you have a potential to set up a conflict role to find her.
Yeah. And in doing these truths at the beginning of the scene, you're trying to serve the greater story as a whole, right? You're not trying to, win. You're not trying to do anything specific for your character. You're picking the most probably dramatic truths that you can say to set up a really interesting scene ahead of you. I know in particular, like, there were some times where we established truths that really did not help us, but they made sense. That would have happened.
Yeah, no, we respected the narrative and the way that we were telling this story as, a dire situation. And we didn't create these crazy superhero truths that would help us out or anything like that. It was just building that narrative, story.
And I got to say, the one thing about respecting the narrative and still playing a game, right? Like, let's say 10 Candles is a game. It is a game about storytelling. I'm trying to remember who said this, and I'm doing a lot of reading around the notion of game design and the sort of psychology of playing games and what it does for us. And one of the definitions I loved about what a game is a game is choosing to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And on that basic principle alone, if you decide, like in your inventory, to load yourself down with the suitcase news, it's like, all you're doing is trying to immediately eliminate the obstacles that make the game, that make the game fun. So by placing the obstacles of, I am not going to establish my moment during the establishing truth phase, I'm going to set it up as an obstacle that I may or may not get past. You are now celebrating the very idea of the game and propelling the narrative forward.
Yeah. For sure. Like, I mean, especially for a moment, you should probably have to roll a conflict roll to gain your moment. It just feels right.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the other thing about that is if you get it, you have overcome the obstacle. There is a moment of triumph in that. And that's what, this is not about winning, but there's triumph, which feels good. You're going to die, but that triumph is like another moment in that before death kind of beautiful experience.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, like, when you come to the table and, like, maybe before you start playing this game, I think it's good to have a discussion about, like, putting the narrative first and having a certain respect for that narrative. It's not about winning this game. It's just, about telling a really entertaining and moving story.
Well, you put that perfect. And I mean, this could be little spoiler, very small spoiler for our play. But Eric, when we were playing, there was a conflict roll. We were looking for guns in a gun store, essentially. Eric found a case, a shotgun or whatever. But when he read out the result of his conflict, he said, I found 3 shotguns, but they're empty.
There's no ammo.
There's no ammo in this case.
And he said, and so as a result of that, I hit the thing with the butt of my gun.
Yeah.
It's like you just had the opportunity to waste this thing.
But it was perfect because the story that we were telling, we wanted to, build the suspense, build the tension.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, you could throw it in there, but respecting the narrative and, the way that we were telling the story, it was perfect.
It was beautiful.
Yep. And I think that, respecting the narrative involves a lot of letting go of some of the things that we really want to do. So, and especially on the part of the GM, like the GM just kind of has to put it in the hands of the players and say, do it.
Yeah. As our longtime GM, like, how did it feel having less of the responsibility on you?
You know what? I don't mind having responsibility, right? I enjoy it. Mm-hmm. What I would say a better answer to that is, rather than thinking about responsibility, was giving you guys agency and saying, I trust you to do this in the best way you know how. And God, it was a good time.
Yeah.
It was such a good time. I loved handing it over to you guys.
Well, because there was beautiful moments and you were included in them when like somebody would do something and we were just like in awe of what they just did with this narrative.
Yeah.
It fills your head with possibilities of what you can do next and add to this. And it's just like building blocks on top of each other,
Right. Right. All right. Well, I think that's probably a great place for us to call this because number one, we've got a video coming out about this. So first of all, we've got the episode where we play. You should definitely go check that out. And 2, we're going to be making a how-to. 10 Candles is available as a PDF download for $10 online. So what we'll do is on the YouTube channel underneath this podcast, we're going to put a link to that. So if you want to go buy it, you can. We think it's a great time for you to have with your players. I had a great time chatting about this. I want to play this more.
It was fun. It was, I know we're on spooky time right now, but like I would play it again.
I want to do this all the time.
Yeah. No, it was fun.
Yeah.
We're leaning a lot more in the stuff that we play, I think, towards narrative stuff more. And this was 100% what it is.
Absolutely.
I don't know if this is podcast talk, but it's interesting seeing us make that change from like, all right, this is a game we're going to play every week. A couple years ago, that was D&D. And now we're becoming like regular, really good storytellers as a group. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, and I love that part of it for sure. All right, everybody, listen, thanks very much for listening to the podcast today. We look forward to bringing you more material down the road. Head over to YouTube and check us out at Wither and Bloom Studios on YouTube. And make sure to comment on some of the stuff we've done. We will certainly read those comments on the air. And again, thanks. We love having you along. We'll talk to you soon. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to iCast Guidance. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix, Garrett Brennan, and Rich Froman. We drop this podcast every week, and we are looking forward to having you hang out for more. Don't forget to head on over to Wither and Bloom Studios on YouTube, follow our channel, and definitely comment on what you see there. We will probably read those on this show. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to next time.